welcome to lesson 6. We are learning about the fingertips today. There are 5 basic shapes when looking at the fingertips, and that is your standard round, conic, pointed, spatulate, square. We look at the fingertips to recognize character by their shape, along with the size of the fingers. Usually we compare the two. So the round tip is the most common. It's a little bit less remarkable, but nevertheless it shows the most versatile traits. We'll talk about the round tip in a minute. The hand often has a combination of shapes. There might be the middle finger or the ring finger in a different shape, and that's very common. So if only 1 or 2 fingers have a distinctive shape, then the association affects a particular aspect. So it's not the broad temperament. So for instance, if the round fingertip shows creative temperament and it's only on 1 finger, it doesn't mean that the personality is generally creative. So it points to just one area. Look at what the meaning of the fingers are. So the basic shapes here are the square, conic, pointed, and spatulate. Sorry, my video is slightly in the way of that one picture. That was pretty poorly made. But basically the spatulate, it spreads out at the very tip, and it does form that slightly bulbous look at the very tip. And the square obviously is not completely square. Obviously still looks rounded at the tip, but they tend to have just these slight corners to them. So it takes a very careful eye to notice the square. So the form that belongs to most of the fingers will have the greatest impact on the general character. The most dominant shape that depicts a person's strongest qualities is the square shape and the spatulate shape. So for instance, on the middle finger with a spatulate, that would show the person has talent in that particular area, which we'll talk about later. So the round tips is the most common. It shows someone who's psychologically balanced. They're usually hardworking and they get along easily with others. They don't like conflict or tension, and they tend to be very trusting of others. Variety is important to them. They get bored quite easily. They can be talented in many ways and can easily succeed as long as they can stay focused on their goals. So the fingerprints will also come into the fingertip shapes, but that is another lesson as well. So the conic tips are a little bit harder to pick because they're only usually slightly pointed at the very tip. It's usually only on the index finger, by the way. So these type of fingertips belong to those who like to make a good impression with their work, with their art, or with their appearance. Often on artists, they can be intuitive and impressionable, but also sensitive to criticism. And that is especially true if the tip of the finger is bulbous. And what I mean by bulbous is the front pad is not flat, and if it's kind of puffy looking, so that makes the person even more sensitive. So emotional reactions to others can be unpredictable. They're inconsistent and unpredictable, so you don't know how this person is going to react. And that is especially true, again, if it's conic and puffy, bulbous. So these conic shapes often love beautiful things, music. They love everything to be in harmony. They want to enjoy life without having too much labor, structure or order. And if they do have that, they do like to have their time off. They need their break to relax, go fishing or whatever. Yeah. They tend to focus on following their passion, so it's rare for them to have time to keep their working space clean, so they can be a bit messy. Putting things in the right place or worrying about regulations can sometimes get forgotten in their activities. And yeah, like I said before, it's mainly a common feature on the index finger called the Jupiter finger. So it depicts intuitive nature as well. Sometimes domineering, and that is especially the case again if it's puffy and slightly conic. That person likes to be the one that tells people what to do. Sometimes they can express their creativity well, so tend to seek occupations where they can do that. The conic tip shows someone creative but sensitive, flexible and changeable, impulsive and intuitive, sensitive to criticism. They can be domineering or passive aggressive. They have a love of luxury and comfort, especially if the area of the bottom phalange is thicker, and they are idealistic or pedantic about certain things. Now we're moving on to the pointed fingertips. Now the pointed fingertips might be a little bit hard to know for sure. If the person has chubby fingers at the bases, it's easy to think that the tips are pointed, so you have to look quite carefully. So the whole top phalange will taper, like starting from the top phalange line, it'll start tapering from that point. And clearly it will be narrower than the rest of the finger. These pointed fingers belong to someone who can be creative and very highly imaginative, but they can be more dreamy and rather sensitive. They can be associated with writers and poets, and they can suggest a sharp mind, and they can get to their viewpoint quickly without the need to mull things over. Also good to look at the fingernails, which we talk about in another video. With the pointed tips, it can show an immature personality, someone who's quite young in their mind. Continuing more, so in regards to them having that sharp mind, that haste in their thoughts and opinions can make them seem argumentative and difficult, especially when they are communicating with someone who deliberates at a much slower pace. So somebody who likes to sit down and think before they speak and can feel that this person with the pointed fingertips is a little bit too opinionated and argumentative. They would not get along. Someone with blunt, fat fingers would not get along very well communication-wise with somebody with pointed fingertips. So the pointed fingertips, they're essentially quite picky and particular about their personal appearance. They have ideals that they believe in, but dealing with day-to-day reality might be difficult, so they might live in a little dream world of what they think is ideal in their life. But if it's only the Jupiter finger, the index finger, that's pointed, then that is a sign that someone that can motivate other people. If all the fingers are very pointed, it's a more fragile personality, and they also tend to be dependent on others. And this is where the childlike quality comes into it. If the fingers, like looking at it from the fingernail side, if they look childish, then that also shows that dependency, that the person might actually be emotionally childish as well. And we go on, and with the skin texture, if it's on soft, flabby hands like that of an infant, they will be needy, lazy, and probably tend to procrastinate. So this type of character might visualize about creating a fulfilling life and accept that their existence revolves around beauty, thoughts, dreams, and visions. Ideally, if they have someone in their life to take care of their practical needs, then that's perfect for them. And that is with the soft skin. It's obviously someone with a hard, tougher skin will prove that the person has, during the course of their life, hardened up and they've not needed to be so needy, and especially not lazy. The tough skin shows someone who has hands-on personality, and they tend to get their work done. But in general, the pointed tips that show someone idealistic, a visionary, but they can be unrealistic and impractical. In some cases, if the skin is fine with a narrow water-shaped hand and a long hand, then it shows someone who's fragile or dainty. Spatula tips. These are the ones where we see if someone has some kind of talent. The spatula tip is when the top widens at the tip. The shape belongs to developers and innovators. These people love to create new ways and discover new lands. Whether mentally or physically, due to their love of activity, they can be restless if not given the freedom to do what they want. So the middle finger and the ring finger in this hand particularly is the hand of a musical technician, and he has creative talent and he has technical ability with the type of work that he does. So these two fingers are showing his talent, and again it shows a sign of restlessness if not being able to do what they want to do. They get quite impatient. If it's on all the fingers, if every single finger is spatula, that is a sign of obsessive compulsiveness. Unless you're a basketball player, then it just shows you have a good grip, like a frog. You can grab that ball really well. So the spatula does show that as well, that somebody with a good grip. Not really palmistry related, but physically makes sense. In general, the spatula tip represents sincerity, practicality, and independence. It is this inventive and inquisitive mind that can bring them success. And here, a full set of spatula tips suggests the love of activity in every sense. They are so adventurous that they are constantly on the go. Possibly obsessiveness, like I mentioned before, especially if the padded tip is also puffy, bulbous looking. A little bit more on the spatula. If it's on the pinky, the mercury finger, the spatula tip denotes skills in communications, physical movement and performance such as acting. On the ring finger, the spatula tip is the mark of an original artist, talent, and depicts energy and focus applied in a creative field. By the way, these creative fields does not necessarily have to be painting or drawing or singing and dancing. You can be creative in other lines of work as well. It's the way you apply your mind in your job. If it has a creative aspect, as in the ideas that you produce to make something work differently or better, that also shows a creative mind. On the middle finger, the Saturn, the spatula tip describes technical ability with a serious nature. On the Jupiter finger, the spatula tip shows more of the obsessiveness and an urge to want to command other people. On to the square tips. So the square tips, like I mentioned before, aren't exactly square, but they have a distinct square look about them. You need to compare it with a round tip before you usually actually notice the squareness. You can also look at the fingernail on the other side. That often will be square as well, rather than a round nail. Just a point, often the round tip has a round nail, the square has a square nail or rectangle nail, and the bulbous tip might have like a fan shaped nail where it's narrower at the bottom and widens at the top. So the square tips belong to those who like order, structure, and organization, especially if the thumb too has a square tip and a square nail. This is often seen on businessmen. They are logical, level-headed, and they believe in justice, and so they make good peacemakers or lawyers due to their high degree of integrity. Science and history and mathematical works often interest them. If it doesn't interest them, they're usually at least good at those subjects. People with square fingertips rarely act on impulse. Instead, they will carefully consider their options. Even though the mind might be a little bit slower, it does help with them being able to handle the details of their work. In this hand, the ring finger and middle finger are slightly square, and the index finger is round. So the hand this belongs to, he is a business-minded person who runs a company. He doesn't own the company, but he runs it as a project manager, and he's got a very creative mind as well. He has talent. He's very talented in what he does, in putting up buildings, high-rise buildings. So someone with many square tips is not usually artistically creative, but they have a substantial knowledge and a sense to make a success of whatever they do. You can easily recognize someone who might have square fingertips based on just how ordered and well organized their life is. Continuing more about the square tips, on the ring finger, it shows someone sensible and earnest with their approach to friends and social life. Their creative qualities will show as technical ability and mainly used for applied objectives such as engineering or in the building type industries. A square tip on the Saturn finger denotes a serious nature with a strict devotion to moral values. They will have a love of tradition and routine in their life. The square on the Mercury finger relates to practical and aptitude for business, such as research and analysis and studies. On the index finger, it can denote a more technical ability and is a mark of a disciplinarian. It can also show teaching ability. Here is a summary of the tips. The round tips, adaptable and capable, creative and emotionally warm, social and easygoing. The most common tip. Laconic tips, creative and sensitive, flexible and changeable, impulsive and intuitive. They can be sensitive to criticism, domineering or passive aggressive. They have a love of luxury or comfort, idealistic or pedantic about particular things. The pointed tips show someone idealistic, a visionary, but they may be unrealistic, impractical, fragile, or dainty. The spatula tips shows energy and enthusiasm. It is someone sporty and adventurous, independent and self-confident. They are original and enterprising. If with a bulbous tip as well, it can show some perfectionist or compulsive tendencies. Square tips shows someone practical and systematic. They are honest and determined people. Some examples. So most hands will have a mixture of elements with the fingertips. So by using the knowledge of the various meanings of the length of the fingers and the shape of the palm, we can put together an overall summary. So the spatula tip shows an area that is active. So that's the area that the person has its most strength in their qualities. The square shows the area where they show their practical abilities. The round is where the person is adaptable. And if it's round on every finger, which is quite common, it shows a very adaptable person to most circumstances. The pointed or conic shows the area where they are sensitive or idealistic. If on a water hand, so the water hand is the narrow hand with longer fingers or longish fingers. And if the water hand has the protruding knuckles, it shows someone who is sensitive, but they're also analytical. They tend to be slow thinking and do not like to rush into anything. They prefer to take their time in implementing any ideas that they have. If the water hand, that narrow hand, has smooth fingers with no protruding knuckles, it shows someone more slow thinking and very patient nature. They're quick to grasp an idea compared to someone with knotted fingers, and they show preciseness in their work or creative field. Earth hand examples. It's rare to have an earth hand with pointed fingertips. The earth hand is a square palm with short looking fingers or a square looking hand. So having pointed fingers on the square hand is not the best combination because it can weaken the practical side of the earth personality. So especially if with smooth fingers, it can show the artistic side is active, but they can be rather impressionable or impulsive with their actions. Psychologically, they may suffer from a lack of self-control and willpower. If the earth hand has round tips and smooth fingers, that's probably more ideal. That denotes someone who's inspirational, creative, quick thinking, pardon me, intuitive and spontaneous. But they can be impulsive too in their actions, but that can reduce some of the practical qualities. If with square fingertips, the square tips on the earth hand will accentuate the rational qualities. They like to take a lead and set a good example for others. They're reliable, sensible, punctual, and like to have everything systematically arranged in their place. They frequently have a love of history, science, and math. If they have artistic skills or artistic taste, it will probably be in the form of sculpture or pottery, things like that. More hands-on artistic skills. The fire and air hand. So the fire hand is the larger palm with the shorter fingers, and if that person has spatulate fingertips, it suggests a lot of enthusiasm, a sense of adventure. The spatulate tips accentuates the energy levels or obsessive qualities of the already enthusiasm of the fire. If it's an air hand, and that would be the square hand with long fingers, especially if they are knotted, it shows a very slow and analytical mind. They tend to look for order and technique in whatever they do. That is the end of lesson 6. Up next in lesson 7, we talk about the crooked or leaning fingers. I hope you've enjoyed that lesson, and I look forward to your next one. Thank you very much.